What is a fallacy? Can you tell me what a fallacy is?
Otixoye, in our friendly conversation, start the fight. Also, Jay and Chad, do you have any papers, books on TAG apart from your vids and Deacon Dr. Ananias' work?
That's transcendental argument, AP.
I mean,
I had no idea.
There's Bonson's Always Ready. There's John Frame's books. There's Van Til's Apologetic. I mean, those are all Protestant books, but that's the only ones I'm aware of.
So just because I said stuff about this very, very briefly in past live streams, I know that there is a disagreement on using theological arguments or logical arguments in an Orthodox Christian framework, and kind of as I'm looking into Orthodoxy and the history of Orthodoxy with theology and with using logical arguments for God and all that, I see that there's kind of a divide between how Eastern theology is one and Western theology is one, and there is there is a sentiment expressed by certain fathers and others, and later on Orthodox scholars in the East, that the whole rationalism is kind of a Western mindset of trying to put God and all that into words and positives and all that, whereas the East is more about mystical and mystery. I also found that Callistus Ware, for example, brings this up in one of his books on the introduction to Orthodoxy. I think it's in the Orthodox way. So when I see, for example, your approach with the transcendental argument, it strikes me as not fitting into what how I perceive Orthodox theology.
Yeah, I would say that it's a little bit of a misunderstanding, because it's true that there have been many church fathers and saints and elders who weren't interested or that adept with that stuff, and that's fine. But there's a whole host of Orthodox church fathers, saints, and theologians who were. So, for example, the Cappadocians were very philosophical in their approach. St. Gregory of Nyssa has a gigantic, 800-page refutation of Eunomius. That's probably the most technical philosophical book you'll ever read. Same with St. Maximus. He uses a lot of arguments from geometry, arguments from, even like Pythagoreanism to kind of get into ways to demonstrate the Trinity. If you go to, St. John of Damascus's classic book, Fount of Knowledge, this is a really important text, which the very beginning page has a transcendental argument on it, the very first page. And he gets that from Aristotle. So transcendental arguments, or retorsion, is actually in metaphysics. So it's something that all the church fathers that were very adept in Greek philosophy, not all of them were, but the ones that were, like John of Damascus or St. Maximus the Confessor, they have a tendency to utilize these points and these principles. Likewise, St. Photius was the most learned man in Byzantium, very philosophical. Even Gregory Palamas, St. Gregory Palamas, who's the most mystical theologian, his treatise against the Filioque is called the Apodictic Treatise. And apodictic refers to Aristotelian logic. So he uses Aristotelian logic to prove that the Latin conception of the Filioque is wrong. So I would say that the Orthodox tradition is just broader than the idea of being purely mystical. And also it's a misnomer to say that that being scholastic is not the same thing as scholasticism and rationalism. So using reason is necessary. It's part of the patristic heritage and apologetic. It has its limitations, but that's not the same thing as rationalism from like Kant or, any of the Enlightenment philosophers. And scholasticism from Aquinas or any of those characters is not the same thing as being scholastic like St. Photius was.
Mm-hmm. Would you think it would be that it would be completely natural or reasonable or understandable to go into a rather to kind of reject that direction of theology and to go more into the, for a person out of personal preferences when exploring religion, exploring Orthodoxy, to go rather into the mysticism? Like, I've recently been interested very much, still trying to explore and still have very limited knowledge of, and want to kind of get into reading more of St. Maximus the Confessor, who seems to be who appeals to me a lot with...
Yeah, the ambigua are, again, kind of like Nyssa's against Eunomius. If you get Maximus's two ambigua, they're probably some of the most difficult advanced texts that you can get. From a philosophical perspective, they're very hard to deal with. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't read them. You definitely should. I would start with Cosmic Mystery, the little blue St. Vladimir Seminary book first, because I think Ambiguous is going to be very, very challenging. It's challenging for me, and I studied philosophy at a graduate level. So you're going to find the richness of the Orthodox tradition has all of that.
Arakota, as a former atheist, AP, what is your opinion on TAG? Jay usually uses it as an atheist, so your opinion would be interesting. Do you have any questions about it for Jay? It's not an argument that I'm terribly well informed on, but I've also generally in the past expressed that I am not really greatly interested in arguments for the existence of God. Or against. Even in my atheist phases, I kind of considered it all a little bit irrelevant to my reasons for believing it or not believing. That said, from what I understand of it, it is a little bit of a presuppositionist perspective. And I don't really know what to say about it, what to ask about it, if anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty obscure philosophical argument for God's existence. So I think the challenge is that it kind of requires a good bit of philosophical interest and proclivities for people to even get into it. So that's probably the biggest weakness or challenge for TAG. But I think it's a logically useful argument. Maybe touching on the point that you made earlier about reason and philosophy and scholasticism. I think that in Orthodoxy, we would agree that reason and logic and apologetics are useful and they have a key role, but they're really just kind of sign pointers pointing to the church. They can't do much more than that. So it definitely has a place. We have to do apologetics, but the summation of Orthodox theology is definitely not rationalized apologetics per se. But I think it's a solid argument.
Isn't it kind of historically more associated with Calvinist?
Well, like I said, I mean, you can in Fount of Knowledge, chapter 1, John Damascus uses Aristotle's transcendental argument for why you can't deny logic or you can't deny worldviews. So I would say there's precedent for it prior to John Calvin, prior to Bonson or Van Til. They did versions of it, but I don't think that. I mean, that'd be like saying, well, Aristotle did a first cause argument, so if you use a first cause argument, you're an Aristotelian. Well, not necessarily. Many church fathers have used cosmological arguments, different arguments. So it'd be a genetic fallacy to say that that the person making the argument determines whether it's good or bad. Well, the argument stands on its own.
So Aristotle, I think
composition.
The one about TAG used to be atheist, and Jay used it against atheists a lot. What is your opinion on the argument? I didn't miss it. Got any questions for Jay about it? I didn't miss it. But I've just in the past, as I also expressed in the past, very, very much, despite having engaged with the arguments for God's existence or against God's existence with classical theism and all that, it has never been very particularly interesting to me, and doesn't even play a role in my eventual coming to faith. So I would rather deal with, for example, the gospel and its relevance to me and my life and to the truth than with arguments for God's existence or against. And in my personal view, I also think, and I know that both David and Jay will start fuming now, I also think that that arguments for or against God's existence are largely ineffective in terms of changing people's minds. And despite both Jay and David disagreeing with me on this, everyone knows that I'm right. So,
yeah, I would say people are different.
Built different.
People are just wired differently, and different things have an impact. Different things impact people differently. Normally, when I'm using arguments for the existence of God, I'm trying to keep theism and Christianity as what William James would call a live hypothesis, meaning it's something you're not just rejecting because you think it's beyond ridiculous or something like that. It's something you could take seriously, and then therefore, it's you're in a position where you can actually believe in it if you take a look. So anyway, I'm trying to make sure that Christianity remains apologetics. I'm trying to make Christianity a live hypothesis for people, something to take seriously, as opposed to
one thing I'd say about your apologetics comment. If you take somebody like Pajot, who is talking to the Peterson audience quite a bit and is a very talented iconographer, a lot of people get interested in Orthodoxy through aesthetics, right? So we wouldn't say that, well, either aesthetics is good or it's bad, or you should be or you shouldn't be, or it's everything or it's nothing. Like, it can be a doorway. And you have, my priest got me an icon of Justin Martyr, and his title is Justin the Philosopher, because he spoke to and tried to convert philosophers to Christ. So Christ says we become all things to all men. I think that there's a place for people that are philosophically inclined. I've met a lot of people over the years who have found the atheist debates that we've done convincing, but not everybody does. Not everybody cares about philosophy. So I think there's, like David said, there's different people.
Yeah, and even what you're pointing out right there, that different people, different things can be persuasive or have an impact on different people. Like, even in the realm of arguments for the existence of God, you'll have people who are like, hey, I really like the design argument, the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, and tag and so on. That's just weird nonsense. But then you'll have philosophers who love the ontological argument. They think everything else is all the scientific arguments are stupid and so on. You talk to I just remember talking to a professor in biology, and I was like, hey, what would you think? Non-believer. I said, what would you think would be the best case for belief in a designer? He goes, oh, DNA. But so anyway, yeah, different people are persuaded by different things.